Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of 2 Days and 2 Nights, which is episode 24 of season 1 of Star Trek Enterprise. This video is a part of Star Trek Week, where I review one episode from each of the 5 Star Trek series with the theme of episodes that I like that everyone else seems to hate. This video is where I cover the episode 2 Days and 2 Nights. So 2 Days and 2 Nights is the episode where the Enterprise arrives at Risa so the majority of crew can take a much needed shore leave. Archer decides to just sit on a beach and read. Mayweather goes rock climbing. Hoshi decides to test her linguistic skills, while Trip and Reed try their luck with the nightclubs. Meanwhile, T'Pol stays on the ship to take command of the skeleton crew, while Dr. Phlox decides to take the time to hibernate for 48 hours, as apparently Denobians typically hibernate for 6 days a year. So Trip and Reed meet a pair of hot chicks they seem to hit it off with, but when they're taken to a basement where they think they're going to get lucky, they instead find out these hot chicks are actually male alien shapeshifters who then shoot them and rob them and leave them tied up in the basement. Hoshi's quiet time testing her language skills turns into a hot romance when she meets a sexy man who is apparently has a particularly difficult language to learn. Captain Archer ends up having a little romance of his own with an attractive neighbor at his resort, but she turns out to be some sort of Tendari agent who is actually just using him to gain intelligence on the Suliban. And Mayweather has an accident while rock climbing, and he has an allergic reaction to the medicine on Risa, so he's taken back to the ship, where they wake up Dr. Phlox from his hibernation, and he isn't at his best because of this, but he does manage to heal Mayweather. The crew then return from the shore leave, and each one of them is dishonest to the others about what they were up to on their vacation. So to be honest, this episode wasn't my first nor my second choice for the Enterprise episode that I like that everyone else seems to hate. The problem is I've already done episode reviews for my first 2 choices. My first choice was These Are the Voyages, which I feel gets far more hate than it deserves. It was voted number 1 worst Star Trek episode at the Las Vegas 50th anniversary convention, and is generally looked on as one of the worst Enterprise episodes, and I don't think it is nearly as bad as all that, and I would say the majority of first and second season episodes are much worse, and it's not even the worst Star Trek series finale, as Endgame is much worse as well. But as I said, I already did a review for that episode, which was requested after I noticeably left it off my 5 worst episode list for Enterprise, which honestly I probably wouldn't even put it in the bottom 30 episodes. I really don't think it's that bad. Enterprise has much worse episodes. Anyway, so my second choice was Carpenter Street, which I wouldn't say is hated, but it's not looked on that favorably and is considered a lower tier Enterprise episode, when it is one of my favorite Enterprise episodes because I feel it's highly underrated. But I already decided to do a review for that episode as well, because I wanted to shed light on this underrated episode. So I looked at the lowest rated episodes on IMDb to try to find my third choice, and that's where I spotted this episode towards the bottom of that list, and I really don't think it belongs there. This episode received an average viewer rating of 6.8, making it the 11th lowest rated episode on that site. While I never considered this one of my favorite episodes, again, I think there are a ton of first and second season episodes that are much worse than this one. In fact, I always thought of this as one of the few episodes from the first season that didn't actually totally suck. In fact, when I did my top 10 funniest episodes of Star Trek video, this episode was a strong contender and nearly made that list, but more on that later on. So overall, I found this episode interesting, as it branches off into 4 different storylines that follow the various characters on their holiday, and it doesn't really have a clear A and B story as most episodes do. An argument could be made that the Archer storyline is the A storyline, but I would argue that even that doesn't really appear that much in this episode. It's more of an even split than anything else. And also, this episode had a lot of build-up as they first talked about going to Risa 2 episodes previously, but they kept getting sidetracked. So the build-up, I think, actually helped build the anticipation for this episode nicely. But ironically, Archer's storyline is the storyline I would point to as the low point of this episode, as it's mostly kind of dull, and the ending where he finds out she's a Tandorian agent promises a suspenseful story that never pays off. In fact, I get the strong impression from this episode that they were intending to set up an extended storyline with the Tandari character, but it is never followed up on again, making this segment all the more useless. The Tandaris, for those who don't remember, refer to a race of aliens that appeared in the episode Detained, where they are led by a Tandari character who was played by Scott Bakula's former Quantum Leap co-star Dean Stockwell. The Tandarians were a race who were prejudiced against the Suliban, and to be honest, this storyline had promise, and had they followed up on this particular storyline, it would have in retrospect justified its existence here, but since they never did, it makes it kind of pointless. I did get the impression, though, from Kayla's reaction when Archer confronted her, that he did have some of the facts wrong about her, and there was a lot more to her than Archer was giving her credit for. So I actually would have preferred a follow-up on this character, but oh well. You know, it's kind of silly for me to actually expect Enterprise to be good, especially in these first 2 seasons. Also, I didn't really like how reserved they played Archer here, as he never actually did have a romance, and it was more of a flirtation. In fact, some of Kayla's lines about the Suliban felt really forced and fake, as soon as it was revealed that the Suliban killed her family, she seems to suddenly change to a different person who's just only interested in talking about the Suliban. So if she really was an agent trying to get information from Archer, she was a very bad one. As for the other storylines in this episode, the one with Hoshi was passable. It wasn't fascinating, but it didn't totally suck either. It was kind of just there. However, the simple fact that they managed to make Hoshi not totally annoying in this episode was actually a big win for the show, as she was okay in this episode, and actually even a tad interesting. Of course, the whole point of this storyline was mainly meant to emphasize the irony of how she just went to the planet to test her skills and ended up getting laid, whereas Trip and Reed's sole purpose for going down there was to get laid, and they didn't manage to do it. And while I found Trip and Reed's fumbling of getting robbed mildly entertaining, I did get kind of tired of this trope of Trip and Reed being losers who can never score. I actually would have preferred if they extended the storyline to have them bounce back in some way, either by managing to get some in the end, or by catching the thieves that did this to them, or both. By having them try to hide the violation they suffered, kind of felt like this episode was victim blaming, and it was expecting us to laugh at the crime that these two suffered. And overall, I just feel the repeated storyline of playing up how stupid these two, especially Trip, was beyond repetitive. However, the high point of this episode by far is the storyline with Dr. Phlox hibernating, as when I mentioned before I nearly put this in my top 10 funniest episode list. It was solely due to these scenes, which were so fucking hilarious. But the reason it didn't end up making my list was because it was only the Phlox scenes in this episode that were funny, so it seemed a bit unfair to elevate the entire episode based off of 2 scenes. But these scenes were bloody hilarious. In fact, I would even go as far to say that these were the funniest scenes in all of Star Trek. I mean, John Billingsley's performance here was simply amazing. I mean, his comedic timing was perfect. Not only would I say this is the funniest scene in Star Trek, I would even go as far to say this is far funnier than the majority of modern day comedy shows currently airing. I mean, when Dr. Phlox gets up and is like, oh, well then, to sick bay, and then just falls flat on his face, I was laughing my ass off. But even better was when he was in sick bay trying to heal Mayweather and kept calling everyone captain. I mean, it was just amazingly well put together comedy sequence. Like when T'Pol noticed how off the wall he was acting and she was like, maybe I should take you back to your quarters, and Phlox's response was, I appreciate the offer, but I think we should keep our relationship professional. And of course, when he all of a sudden presses the comm to the bridge and is like, set a course to Rigel 4, maximum warp! I mean, these scenes work so well. I very nearly put the entire episode in the top 10 funniest list just for this one scene alone. Also, this is the second appearance of Crewman Cutler, who was seen in the episode Dear Doctor, where this character had a bit of a crush on Dr. Phlox. And the chemistry between these two characters worked very well and had me wondering why she never appeared again after this episode. And I was all set to criticize the show for not making her a recurring character until researching this episode I found out that the actress who played Crewman Cutler died shortly after filming this episode. So that's actually quite tragic. I didn't realize that this was the case. And it's really a shame too, as maybe if she hadn't passed away, she would have become a recurring character, which in my opinion would have enhanced the show overall. So my rating for 2 days and 2 nights out of 10 is a 5 average. I was originally intending to give this episode a 4, but I think the Phlox scenes alone elevate this episode a full point. While this episode isn't one of the best in the world, as it's kind of silly at times, and other than the Phlox storyline, it actually isn't that funny. But on the other hand, it's not that bad either, because it does represent a break from the monotony of Enterprise and does explore some of the characters very well, and overall the format of having so many different storylines in one episode I think helped it to be more entertaining, even if they did kind of fumble 2 of the storylines. But one of them was the best comedy ever seen on Star Trek, so I don't think this episode at all belongs in the conversation of the worst Enterprise episode, especially considering the absurd amount of garbage this series pumped out in its first 2 seasons. So that's it for my review of 2 days and 2 nights, and this concludes Star Trek Week for episodes that I like that everyone else seems to hate. But you can check out my channel for the other 4 videos in this series, which include the Alternative Factor, Frame of Mind, Move Along Home, and the Voyager episode Nemesis. But be sure to check out my channel as I continue to do Star Trek videos in the future, as well as many more videos on other shows like Game of Thrones, Vikings, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.